So I'm going to be talking to you today about developing a seed potato system to serve the needs of Midwest organic farmers. And we've taken a participatory approach to this. In some ways, I feel a little bit like a ring-in, since this is a plant breeding session. We have not done a lot of plant breeding, but we will get to talk a little bit about that later in the talk. So I'm going to start by talking about seed potato production, because all of you are familiar with the idea of seed crops for other types of crops where we plant true seed. With potato, we plant a vegetative propagule, the seed potato. And the difference that this makes is that vegetative propagules can carry pathogens that were present in the parent plant. And in the case of potato, this includes viruses, viroids, bacteria, fungal, a whole laundry list of pathogens that can basically hitch a ride with a seed potato. And this has significant impacts on yield and quality of the crop that is grown from those seed. So to deal with this problem, seed potato certification programs have been set up in many states, and these are regulated by law. They use a limited generation system which starts with pathogen-free plants in tissue culture, and this will all become relevant very shortly. The certification program also includes inspection and testing of seed potato crops, which is an essential step in making sure that the seed that is provided to growers is below a disease threshold or a pathogen threshold that will allow a healthy crop and a productive crop to be grown. Potato virus Y is the main cause of problems in seed potato production in North America. Multiple species of aphids vector potato virus Y, and those aphids transmit potato virus Y through very short feeding times on the crop, and then they can leave the crop, leaving behind this burden of virus. And this often occurs late in the season at a point where symptoms will not be expressed and it's not possible to remove those plants from the seed system. So to deal with this, the certification programs do a winter test where they take a post-harvest sample of 400 tubers generally, grow that out in a warm climate or in the greenhouse to determine disease incidence. And this just shows some symptoms of virus infection where this is a healthy plant, and over here and here we have stunted, diseased plants. Just the obligatory palm tree picture I have to show if I'm talking about winter tests. This is in Florida. So all of you will be no doubt familiar with the organic rule that organic producers have to use organically produced seed stock, whether that is true seed or seed potatoes or some other seed stock. The exception to this is if an equivalent organically produced variety is not commercially available, they can use non-organically produced. And a lot of organic farmers do end up in this position when they're planting potato crops. Especially in the Midwest, there are very limited sources of organically produced certified seed potatoes. There is one grower in Wisconsin, just one, and there are no other growers in the surrounding states who produce organic seed potatoes under a certification system. There are very limited sources of specialty varieties, and this is in part due to the fact that we have a very large-scale conventional seed potato production process that basically feeds the processing industries, making potato chips, French fries. And that large-scale system is focused on a small set of varieties, and it does not serve the needs, it's not scaled to serve the needs of organic growers. And into this context, we stepped to try to build a seed system that would meet the needs of organic growers. At the moment, many organic growers save their own seed potatoes. They do see pathogen accumulation and the same kind of run out, what it used to be called, after a few years of saving your seed potatoes, they run out. This is what it was called before we understood it was a pathogen problem. Also, many growers buy seed potatoes from other regions. If they're buying certified seed potatoes, those have been inspected, and so that's a reduced risk. But we have seen movement of some serious pathogens around the country in recent years, such as potato cyst nematode, which once it's in the soil is not going to leave. So this is a quarantine issue, and that leads me to our long-term goals. which are to increase organic production of healthy seed potatoes to supply the Midwest demand, increase access to heirloom and specialty potato varieties that are suited to organic production, and also to breed potato varieties that are suited to organic production. So we started this work in 2007 to look at the feasibility of organic seed potato production in different parts of Wisconsin. And I want to draw your attention to these white stars, which are the locations of the farms that were involved in this work. 5 in the southern region of the state, including a research station with organically managed and certified land. 2 in the central region of the state, including another research station with organic land, and 1 in the north. And I want to point out to you that this approximates the area in which there is large-scale commercial production of potatoes in Wisconsin. Large-scale production of potatoes translates to a lot of inoculum available to infect a seed potato crop. So we planted foundation class seed potatoes of both potato virus Y resistant and susceptible varieties. We're focusing on potato virus Y since it is the major problem in seed potato quality and certification. And we sampled tubers to do a post-harvest test. So I'm just going to jump right to the data, and I want you to see that this is split up. We have potato virus Y incidence along the Y-axis, and this is split up into the farms from the southern tier, farms from central Wisconsin, and farms from northern Wisconsin. And then we're looking at 2 years, 2007 and 2008, and we're looking at resistant and susceptible varieties. And what you can very quickly see is that in the southern tier of the state, we don't have very much virus infection in those seed potato crops. As you move further north in the state, you do see more infection, and you see a fairly strong effect of susceptibility. Now, years vary in terms of the prevalence of aphids, so that's part of the reason we're seeing differences between years. And you might imagine that, as is true in fact, that because aphids and insects generally tend to be more prevalent in the southern parts of the state, that we would not see this increased incidence as we get further north. What this is telling us is that it is proximity to other potatoes that conditions the likelihood of incidence of virus in the crop. And this has been confirmed by research by Ross Groves at the Department of Entomology. There are other sources of evidence backing the proximity to potato as conditioning whether you can produce a good, clean seed potato crop or not. So we also had a collaboration with Joe Gentner and Gina Greenway from the University of Idaho. They're economists who specialize in potato production. And we looked at the economic feasibility of organic potato production. They based their information on interviews with groups of growers at the Organic Farming Conference a few years ago. And I want to draw your attention to one assumption they made. They assumed that conventional seed was planted for both seed potato production and for fresh market production when they were modeling the economics of those production systems. The reason for this is that if you are growing seed potatoes within a certification system, you have to plant foundation class, an early generation of seed potatoes, and that is very rarely, if ever, available. I've tried to find it as organic seed, and it's very difficult to find. So this draws out the you see the total cost per acre of the seed potato or the potato production system, and then broken down into different categories. So you see that seed potato costs are a little higher, but in line with other costs on the farm. But into this, I want to inject the fact that organic seed potato prices tend to range from about $1.20 to $2 per pound. Conventional seed potatoes are about a quarter to a fifth of that. So when you put this into the scenario for someone growing fresh market potatoes, suddenly you see an enormous increase in their seed costs to more than the entire cost of production per acre. So this is something that we have run into in our research as we've talked to farmers about the economics of this. If there is an increased supply of organic seed potatoes, which we want there to be, this is going to impact their ability to make a living. Also, if farmers are growing seed potatoes, they also have the option of selling them as fresh market potatoes. And when you look at the prices on the fresh market, you see that they can make easily as much money selling them as fresh market potatoes as selling them as seed potatoes. So this is not a problem that I have a solution for. It is a problem that I'm bringing to this group because I think as we think about the growth of the organic industry and the growth of the organic seed industry, this is a problem that is going to be true for a number of other crops as well as potatoes. And so ultimately, though, we did conclude that this would be a profitable enterprise, whether growing for seed or growing for the fresh market, with gross income ranging from $24,000 to $40,000 per acre for seed. So it's definitely something that is both technically and economically feasible. At this point, I'm going to switch to talking about varieties, because as we went through this work in our early years of research with farmers, we learned that there were a lot of many of these farmers were trying new varieties constantly, looking for potatoes that worked well in their production systems. And so we turned to focusing on variety trials for a few years. Between 2010 and 2012, we ran trials on farm, again with many of the same farmers as in the previous years. And we used a modified central satellite design, sometimes called a mother-baby design, where some of the farms replicated varieties and others did not. In the first year, all of the farms involved replicated the 16 varieties. This was burdensome for the farmers, and so we gradually moved to a system where many of the farms were not replicating. So it was closer to a mother-baby design. So rather than jumping straight to yield data, I want to look at some of the variety characteristics that correlated with total yield, because this is the kind of information that the farmers can use to select varieties that do well for them. And looking at this with a Spearman correlation coefficient, we see that we have low to moderate correlations between total yield and vigor of the plants, and also row closure. This is supported also by a negative correlation between weeds and vigor. And we also see low to moderate negative correlations between total yield and insect damage, represented here by Colorado potato beetles and by leafhoppers. So ultimately what we draw out of this is a relationship between vigorous plants, fewer weeds, and tolerance or resistance to insects, that these are contributing to total yield. We don't know what the causality of this is, but certainly it's almost a truism in organic circles that plants or crop varieties with high early vigor are going to suppress weeds, and that's going to lead to a more productive system. So hopper burn is one of the insect problems. This is considered to be one of the biggest challenges for organic potato production. And we put our varieties into, or rather we scored hopper burn on our varieties. And I just want to draw your attention to the wide range of symptoms that we see when we compare varieties within a market class. So for example, looking at the red potatoes, we go from fairly low impact on the foliage at about 12% of the foliage affected by hopper burn, up to, for red sunset, over 70% of the foliage. And when you look at these kinds of examples of the symptoms, you can very quickly see that if we're in this situation where we don't have too much damage, we're going to get much better yields than when the leaves are really affected by hopper burn. So there are choices for farmers. And as we characterize more varieties for these kinds of characteristics that are important to farmers, it's going to aid them in making better choices. I'm going to just very quickly go over this. One of the other things we saw was very significant unmarketability, a lot of potatoes being culled due to surface defects from either common scab, black scurf, or silver scurf. And again, we have a very wide range of responses from different varieties. And not only does this give farmers some information about variety choice, but it also gives us some information about where more breeding is needed. For example, these specialty varieties have very severe issues with silver scurf. They're mostly blue-fleshed, blue-skinned varieties, so this is definitely a breeding focus. Just quickly to give you an idea of the kind of data that we're supplying to farmers, I want to show you the comparison between 2 years for red varieties. So we're looking at 2011 here and 2012 here. Most of these varieties were grown in both years. 2012, as I'm sure you all remember, was an extremely hot and dry year, and potatoes do not really like those kinds of conditions. So at the end of 2011, I would have quite happily said to growers, well, Chieftain is a really good option for you. Most people are growing dark red Norland. It's a really popular variety, but you should certainly be looking at Red Maria and Chieftain. They're yielding much better. When you go down to 2012, however, you see that these three varieties are very comparable, and I was the one who went through a lot of these trials and pulled out the unmarketable potatoes, and I can tell you that for the most part this was due to really funky shapes. Potatoes do not like stress. They stop growing, and when they start growing again you get really weird shapes. So what this tells us is that there's a G by E interaction. That's not surprising, and that dark red Norland's popularity perhaps is due to the fact that it's not so affected. Even though it has a lower yield in excellent conditions, it's not so affected by quality issues in stressful years. So as we accumulate more and more years of information, we're going to be able to pull out more of these kinds of G by E interactions and understand what contributes to stability of marketable yield. And I just wanted to put this up briefly so that you know that we have more information about more market classes, and if you're interested, you can certainly go to our website to take a look at that. We have moved on in the last couple of years to trialling heirloom potato varieties because there's a lot of interest in heirloom potatoes amongst farmers. They have interesting stories, and there's also a perception that is sometimes borne out that these older varieties that were bred and released before a lot of chemical inputs were in use may be more robust in an organic system. So we've worked with Seed Savers Exchange. They have a very large potato collection. We had to eradicate viruses from many of these varieties. A lot of them had at least one or more than one virus. So we went through that process, also obtained some other interesting heirloom varieties from Canadian and the USDA collections, and then went forward with evaluation of these on farm. And I want to just mention that as we have gone through, oh, yes, sorry, I was jumping ahead. Wrong slide. So again, we used a mother-baby or central satellite approach where we had replicated trials at our organically certified research station land, and we had single replicate trials at farms. So we had 34 varieties in 2013, 67 in 2014. That's too many. I can tell you now, if you're managing a replicated trial of potatoes, that is too many. And then we had 20 farms in 2013 and 17 in 2014. And that's the number of farms that reported. We had more farms start out. Some people had floods. Some people, it was a wild year for a few people around the Midwest. Okay, so this is what I wanted to mention, that when you think about participatory research, there is definitely a continuum. And when we started our work, oh, that's right, I have pictures. That's when I had red hair. That's a while ago. When we started our work, we were definitely down at this end of research and managed trials. And as we've gone along, we are getting much more to a collaborative relationship, moving in to a farmer-managed relationship in many cases. And I'm finding that not only are we able to sample conditions on a lot more farms because of this, also this was not something I was anticipating, we've seen a much greater diversity. And I'm just including this slide, which breaks out participating farmers by gender, to illustrate the fact that we see more diversity. Early in our trials, the vast majority of the farmers were male, and as we have moved down into the last couple of years, we're approaching parity of male and female farmers being involved. I could break this out in other ways, farm scale, markets that are served. There are a lot of different ways in which the group has become a lot more diverse, and I feel a lot more representative of the organic community and the sustainable agriculture community and the local food community. And that's what I'm interested in. That's the community I'm interested in. So I'm getting towards the end, I promise, Bill. 5 minutes, wow, okay. And I just want to show you an example of a way to look at the data you get from quite a large, it's a large data set, a lot of farms, a lot of diversity within the farms, and a lot of different varieties. And I'm going to start off over here. I just looking at p-values, which a lot of us are very comfortable with, myself included, and looking at different factors. So what you'll see very quickly is that almost everything is significant. And when we look at something like that, we think, well, everything is significant. There's G by E. What am I going to recommend to a farmer? It's taken quite a bit of mental reshuffling for me, as Julie can probably attest, to come around to the point of view of looking at the breakdowns of variance that we see in a large-scale multi-year trial like this. And what is very interesting to me when I look at this breakdown of variance between different factors is the degree to which farm stands out as a contributor or a way to explain an enormous amount of the variance in this data set. I pulled out a subset of farmers who are large scale, so they're growing in a mechanized system, and they are experienced potato growers. They've been doing this for more than 5 years, and many for quite a bit longer than that. And when you do that, the farm effect is not significant. So I find this very exciting because it tells me that I can really start to dig into this variance, and I can dig down to the point where I can actually make recommendations to farmers based on their practices. This may seem very obvious to many of you, but it was a journey for me to get to the point of understanding that. Interestingly, in just this 2-year data set, year accounted for very little variance. I'm going to put together the whole data set and probably we'll learn a little bit more about that. And probably because of the fairly uniform conditions over the last couple of years, we see that variety interacts significantly with farm, but not year. So again, it'll be exciting to dig into this farm factor and find out what's going on there. Our future work, we are going to be returning to seed potato production trials under organic management. And this is going to be, as I said before, we previously were doing this much more as a researcher-managed trial. Now that we've built more relationships and have a better understanding from the researcher standpoint of how to do a participatory trial genuinely, I think this is the right time to go back to this work to try to build capacity. We are continuing evaluation of promising varieties and also some breeding lines that we have coming out, which I'm just showing off down here. Hopefully they will hold up to their early promise. And we're also initiating a true potato seed project to train farmers in crossing potatoes and selecting amongst the progeny as part of an effort to increase participatory and farmer-led breeding for potatoes. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I will take any questions.